If we wanted to put our finger on exactly what is wrong with our approach to psychology as a whole and our therapeutic modalities, assuming, of course, that we are prepared to agree that there is something wrong with our approach in these matters, and maybe we're not. Maybe we think we're bang on the money with the approach that we've already got, or the approaches that we've already got. But then again, maybe we don't think that. And I think anyone that is working in the field of mental health is not necessarily going to be completely convinced that we're bang on the money. Obviously, we can't go around expressing fundamental doubt, because that's not a good thing to do. No one will like us for that. But I think it's fair to say that on the whole, we do suspect that we haven't really sussed it out properly. It's just that it's not the done thing to go around saying that. Not when there's a whole industry based upon it. And there is a whole industry based upon it. So if we wanted to put our finger on it, what we could say is that we've jumped to an assumption about what it means to be a human being, what it is, what being a human being is, or what being not just a human being, but any conscious entity. We've completely missed a very important assumption that we've made, and we've gone skating on blithely, as is always the way. We jump to a conclusion. We don't even realize that we've jumped to a conclusion, because that conclusion is inherent in our very way of, in our language, in our very way of talking about things, thinking about things. That's all a conclusion that we've jumped to. Our way of thinking about things is a conclusion that we've jumped to. So as a result of this conclusion, we imagine that the products of thought's creations, are adequate and sufficient to help us with regard to our mental health. So we're looking for the answer under the street light of rationality. So it's kind of like we're lost, like in the joke. We're lost late at night, and well, we're not lost, but we lost our car keys late at night, and we're looking under a bright street light, because that's where the light is, the light of the rational mind. And I didn't tell that joke very well, but the point is that we are assuming that rationality will provide us with the answers. But all of the things that thought creates are cheap gimmicks. They're cheap and nasty gimmicks. Every single thing that thought creates is a cheap and nasty gimmick, particularly when we are relating it to what it means to be a human being, which is way outside of the grasp of thought. When we look at all the different types of therapies, this becomes very clear. I saw recently a discussion on it was some group to do with embodiment. So embodiment's kind of a therapeutic approach, a broad therapeutic approach. And I'm not saying this is a bad one. It's better than anything that ignores embodiment. But some person had said, look, I've got such and such a problem. I've got anxiety. I'm suffering from panic attacks. anyone out there would suggest anything from your experience, what would help. So what happened then is that there was a whole bunch of people posting therapies, what they thought would help, a whole ream of them, mainly acronyms, because all of these modern therapies seem to come in the form of acronyms, whether it's radical acceptance therapy or whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectic behavioral, whatever the hell it is, it's an acronym. So straight away, there's something nasty about that, because acronyms are just cheap and nasty labels, and that they really do give a flavour. If the therapy I'm promoting can be reduced to an acronym, then it's nothing. It really isn't anything at all. Anything that I can understand and write down and describe in a logically coherent way is a gimmick, a cheap and nasty, useless gimmick. Now, this is not necessarily obvious. In fact, it's not obvious at all. But when we're talking about the psyche, when we're talking about what it is that we are as human beings, that is very much the case. It's really something in the line of a grotesque insult to suggest that something that can be. It's like imagining that something you read on the back of a Weetabix packet can transform your life. It's that type of absurdity that we're talking about here. How can anything that the rational mind can encapsulate and write down in this kind of systematic way be any use to us at all? I mean, that implies that we are on the same level as thought, and that we are of a similar nature, or that we're a similar kind of thing to thought's constructs. And that's the very big, huge assumption that we've made here, that we're of a kind with everything else that we rationally understand and what we understand the world to be. And that is a hard point to get across. But one way that we could try to, we can say, okay, what we are as human beings is fundamentally mysterious. We could say that, and that's been said a lot. But the problem with that is we tend to say it in a kind of a way that glorifies the ego. So we go around thinking, yes, my essence is mysterious, and that kind of gives us that enhances the ego. Essentially, it becomes one of these things that we say because it kind of makes us feel good. So mysterious isn't a good word, even though it is mysterious. That particular term doesn't really work because it's been abused too much. Because we all like, oh, a mystery, it's a mystery. But that doesn't really get us anywhere, because it just slots into a particular way of thinking that has never got us anywhere in the past. But a better way to talk about it, a better way to talk about the psyche, if we call it the psyche, which is a good term. I don't know of any other term that I could use, is that there's two types of stuff in the world. There's stuff that exists properly within a framework, within the framework of thought, and there's stuff which actually has its origin outside of the framework of thought and which can't be represented within the framework of thought without totally altering its nature, inverting its nature, turning it into something it absolutely isn't. So this is kind of, again, this is coming up to the same difficulty we always have, because the only stuff we ever deal with really is stuff that is presented to us as existing within the framework of thought, and so we don't even think of things as existing within the framework of thought, because that's the only way we ever know things. But the framework of thought really is representing in such a way that it makes sense in terms of a set of axes which we can get a reading out of. So really it's exactly the same as talking about location. If I have two axes, I can provide an exact location for any point within that domain, which is created by having two axes. There's a flat domain, a 2D domain. So that's obviously an abstraction, but then we could say, okay, let's have 3 dimensions or more if we want to. And then we kind of get the feeling that we're talking about real 3D space, the real physical world. Thinking, well, if I've got a 3-dimensional, I'm talking about solids. We live in a world full of solids, so, I'm getting close to describing reality. But I'm not, for the simple reason that I've created this kind of device whereby the entirety of what I'm describing is contained within the artificial framework within which I am describing it. So really I can never describe what isn't already my artificial framework, which is limited. It's a totally sterile situation. And as it happens, nothing real can ever be described in terms of a framework. Nothing real can ever be fitted into a framework, because reality itself originates, not that it originates, because that implies that there's some kind of demarcation point or a starting off point, but maybe we could say that reality itself belongs to outside of the framework. It's just not something that has become an obedient subject in the kingdom of thought. So thought requires us all to conform to its assumptions. And we do that without even realizing we've done it. So everything that we can think about is really just thought, is really just an extension of the assumptions we have made in order to be able to think. And those assumptions have got nothing to do with reality. We wouldn't even know how to go around assuming what reality is, because assuming is a kind of to assume something means we know what it is, that it fits in with some kind of concept or model that we have. And why we should imagine that everything should fit in with our models or concepts is strange, because our models and concepts come out of something that is bigger than them. And so, although it's fine to have models and concepts, to imagine that the model or concept then can explain everything is to get lost in that model or concept, and imagine that everything is this ridiculous oversimplification, which is all that a model or a concept can ever be. So what we can say, without being mysterious about it, is just to say the nature of what it means to be a person, or the nature of the psyche, is such that it doesn't properly belong within a framework. And then we might, of course, be wanting to know just a little bit about what is outside of the framework, what kind of stuff is out there. Because it sounds very interesting. It is very interesting. So we want to know a little bit about it. What kind of stuff is that? Is there anything we can say about it, know about it? Any kind of little flavor that it might have, or some kind of property that it might have? And this is where we come to the very well-known formula of all negative philosophy, which is to say that all characteristics, all details, all kind of things that we can say are only ever projections of a framework. And that if there's something outside of that framework, it doesn't have any things that we can say about it at all. It doesn't have any characteristics, any features whatsoever. In other words, we can't get outside of it to describe it from some kind of remove. And that shouldn't be surprising, because how can we get outside of reality to describe it from some kind of safe or convenient remove? How could we ever do that? And we do it, but when we do it, what we're describing, what we're scrutinizing, what we're looking at under the microscope, even though it does have characteristics, even though there are things we can say about it, is different in kind. It's a totally different kettle of fish from what we were trying to describe. We turned it into something else. What we've turned it into is a projection of our own assumptions, which are wrong, because all assumptions are wrong when it comes to reality. So we've turned it into a reflection of our assumptions that we can't recognize to be a reflection of our assumptions, but which we think is a real, actually objective thing. And then we get all caught up in that, which is total insanity, not to put too fine a point on it. That really is totally, totally insane. We're playing some sort of convoluted game with ourselves, and we don't know that it's a game. But it is perfectly okay, and it shouldn't offend us for it to be the case that reality is something that we can't get outside of. Why? I know I'm repeating myself, but why would we want to get outside of reality and study it? I'm not saying there isn't a reason why we would want to do that, but what I would suggest is that it's not a wholesome reason. We're looking for some kind of certainty or reassurance or security that isn't there at all, and that when we do think we've found this reassurance or security, then the price for that is that what we're looking at isn't reality anymore. So we can talk about reality as being what lies outside of the framework of thought or beyond the framework of thought. And we can also talk about the psyche as existing outside of the framework of thought, or what it means to be a human being is something that exists outside of the framework of thought. So that becomes strange to us to say those two statements one after another, because what we're doing there is we're straight away, it sounds like reality, the unmanipulated situation, the way things are in themselves or of themselves without us interfering in any way, which is the only good way to talk about reality. It's not something we did or made or came up with. So we're saying that about reality, and we're also saying that who we are is that same thing. That they're parallel statements, really, and that comes across as being a little bit strange, because we like to think of what human beings are, what people are, what conscious entities are, as being really something that can be scrutinized within the framework, down the microscope of the rational mind, and brought into sharp focus and exclusively known. In other words, we really, really want to diminish what it means to be human. So it's just a kind of a thing, just an understandable phenomena, like all other understandable phenomena. We just put it on the table with all the rest of them, and then we'll congratulate ourselves on solving that riddle, just as we've solved all of the rest. So in science, we might imagine that we've solved riddles, and we say, well, psychology is our heroic way of solving the riddle of what it means to be a person. And then great, we solve it and put it on the table with all the other solved riddles. And then presumably there's some kind of payoff for that, benefit for that. We can, from knowledge comes the ability to control. From knowledge comes power. We have power over something somehow. We might imagine, or that it's going to do us some kind of good. Or at least we'll feel secure, if nothing else, because we've got it all there. It's like trophies. It's another trophy to add to our trophy case. And the only thing about that is that we haven't solved any riddles. We haven't solved any riddles, and science was never about solving riddles. It's not about making black and white pictures of things that we can 100% exclusively understand. As Richard Feynman says, that isn't science at all. Science unlocks a network of such huge complexity. It doesn't close everything down into a simplistic kind of picture. The more we research, the more interdependent everything gets, the more complex everything gets. Science isn't about reducing things, even though that's how science started off, with the hope that we could explain everything. That's the original positivistic, not that all scientists were positivistic in that way, but there is this understanding, a cultural understanding. That's what we were hoping to get, a particular type of understanding of everything, the theory of everything. Isn't it great? I've got a theory of everything, which just means that I've translated everything into the terms that the thinking mind can understand. That's what that means, really. And in doing so, I've turned it into something else. I've turned it into a reflection of my own assumptions, as I keep on saying. So we can't really, just as in science, we can't explain away stuff. Say, oh, it's only that. It's nothing but this. It's nothing but that. Just as we can't do that in science, we can't do that in psychology about what it means to be a human being either. We can't be diminished in this way. And because we can't be diminished in this way, we can't bring to bear these ridiculous, tacky, cheap, anachronistic therapeutic modes that we have at a 10 a penny, and they're just garbage productions of thought. There's nothing that any production of thought can do to benefit what lies outside of the framework of thought. Not that what lies outside of the framework of the thought needs us to help it in any way or improve it. So it can be said that all of our mental health issues come from not acknowledging any reality that lies outside of the framework, because that involves us in all sorts of paradoxes and contradictions, which are evidence of the invisible meaninglessness of life within the framework. So life within the framework, it's okay to have a framework and do stuff within a framework and use it for things, that are that it is appropriate to use the framework for. But when we live inside the framework, then we've created this thing which is invisible meaninglessness. It's completely invisible to us, but that doesn't mean that it's meaningful. We just can't see that it's meaningless, and we have a type of a false meaning that is actually a self-cancelling meaning, a meaning that wars against itself and contradicts itself the whole time. So what needs helping or improving or benefiting is not who we really are, it's who we think we are. And we can't benefit or help or improve who we think we are by using yet more thinking, because that just adds more complications to the knot which we're already struggling with. Okay, thanks for watching.